Hey y'all, welcome back. I know it's not a Saturday, it is a Wednesday, but I'm finally able to sit down and share with you guys this video that I was supposed to be recording. My life has just been hectic, it's been super busy, and it's funny. I actually spoke at a motherhood and womanhood event over the weekend, and I shared what I'm about to share with you guys today, and that is my son's miracle pregnancy and the birth story and Down syndrome diagnosis of my son. And I just want to encourage any mom who may have just recently received a Down syndrome diagnosis that it's going to be okay, and I hope my story encourages you. Also, if you have had a complicated pregnancy, I hope this encourages you as well. So when my daughter turned about 10 months, I began to have really bad baby fever. And if you're a mom of more than one kid, then you know that it gets real. The baby fever gets bad. And the first thing that I did was I hit my knees and I asked God to show me that if this is His will for my life, if the timing was right, and begin to show me signs, if this is you, God, if this is you placing this desire in my heart. So maybe in July one morning I took a quiz, one of the little Facebook quizzer games, and this one said, when will you be pregnant and what will the gender be? So it said I will be pregnant in September and I'll be having a baby boy. And I kind of just laughed it off like, okay, whatever, God, you know, haha, this is funny. I don't really rely on the Facebook games to predict like anything in the future for me, so I just kind of brushed it off. And that exact same day, we went to a church around the corner, me and my husband. We had never saw this church. I don't know how we missed it, but they were doing a community event that day, and they were barbecuing and giving away clothes and giving away books and everything like that. So we stopped by. We met a lot of nice people there, but one man in particular prophesied to us, and as he was prophesying to us, he told us, y'all have a baby boy on the way, get ready. And I was kind of shook. I was like, okay, God, is this really you speaking to me? Like, God, is this really you speaking to me and my husband? I want to know. I need to know. Send us another sign so that we can be sure this is you. And I kid y'all not, like an hour later, we went to a grocery store that we always go to, and we were paying for our groceries in the checkout line, and an older woman comes up behind us and she's like, is this your daughter? She's so cute. How old is she? And I'm like, she's 10 months. And she's like, oh, y'all might as well give her a baby brother now. It's time. Y'all, these are her exact words. And it's something about the way she said it's time. It penetrated my spirit. It hit my spirit, and I knew at that moment and at that instance God had spoke. I knew that this was God speaking to me and my husband, because I know in His word it also says in 2 Corinthians that out of the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses shall every word and every matter be established. So I knew that this was God confirming His will, and it's amazing how He did that through 2 or 3 different sources on that exact same day. And me and my husband got home, and as we were putting up the groceries, we just began to smile at each other, and we just talked about it, and we began to plan for a baby boy. And God is not a liar of His word, y'all. 2 months later in September, we got pregnant with our baby boy, our son. And we were over the moon. We were so ecstatic because God had delivered what He promised. And the joy was short-lived though, because 2 weeks after I got a positive pregnancy test, I end up in the hospital because I was bleeding and I was cramping, and these are signs that point to miscarriage. So the doctors give me an ultrasound, and this is what they showed me. They showed me that there was no baby, there was no heartbeat, and there was only a yolk sac where the baby was supposed to be. So I'm sitting here staring at this empty ultrasound with a little black bubble where there is nothing, there are no traces. And I know that some women say that they have an empty ultrasound and their pregnancy ends up being fine. I know other women also say that they end up bleeding and their pregnancy early on is fine. But with all the symptoms combined that I was having, this definitely pointed to a miscarriage. So the biggest factor that we were looking at as well was that my HCG levels were not rising. They were not doubling. And the HCG is the pregnancy hormone that's supposed to double, and that means your pregnancy is progressing, and mine was not. So the only option that they gave us at this time was to wait a week and come back. Me and my husband were very hurt, you know, and we were just sad, but I continued to just pray over myself. I was anointing my womb. I was speaking life. I was speaking contrary to what was put before us. And we go back a week later and we see the same empty ultrasound. Nothing has changed. My levels are slowly rising, if they rose any, like barely. Probably not any at the time. And as I was getting this ultrasound though, I looked up at the ceiling and there was this rainbow light fixture in the hospital. I look up as I'm getting this ultrasound, there's a rainbow. And God brought it to my attention that in the Bible, he gave the rainbow as a sign of his promise. So I hear the Holy Spirit saying to me, this is God's promise. God promised you this. And I know God is not a liar. So even as I got the empty ultrasound, I looked up and that rainbow at that moment gave me hope. That rainbow gave me life. That rainbow reminded me of what God promised me. So I went home and I just continued to say, God, you promised. You know, I know you didn't allow us to get pregnant for us to just miscarry. And even though the bleeding was picking up, even though I had every possible symptom in front of me saying that I was miscarrying, I was just crazy enough to believe. I had crazy faith that if God promised us this, that if he prophesied to us, he's going to do it. I don't care what it looks like or what's happening, God's going to do it. And so we go back a week later and there was a baby and there was a heartbeat. And we rejoiced. I was so happy. I was so ecstatic. And I just wanted to share that with you guys, to say that God is faithful. God can do anything. Even though the doctors were saying what they were saying, I know the doctor that created those doctors. And I love to say that because he's the ultimate doctor. He has the last say so. And I know everyone's situation may be different. Everyone may have a different experience or story, but I want to encourage somebody today that's completely given up hope, that are letting their medical issues or maybe a hard pregnancy destroy their faith in God. If God did it for me, he can do it for someone else. So I hope that encouraged you guys, that miracle of almost miscarrying, but God allowed life. So from then on, the pregnancy was going good. The pregnancy was going amazing. Everything was looking like it should. And so we got hit with another bomb around our 13 or 14 week appointment. The ultrasound tech that was doing our ultrasound was looking like really intrigued. She was zooming in on the screen, and this was the longest ultrasound that we had ever been to. So I knew something was up. She was just looking, she had a look on her face like something was wrong. So I tell my husband, and he's always so chill in situations like this. He's like, no babe, it's okay, you know, she's probably just trying to get extra detail, blah blah blah. So I'm like, okay, you're probably right. Our OB comes in and she says, oh, you guys are good to go, everything's looking great. So we like, yes, because it had been rough in the beginning. But then she comes back a couple minutes later like, oh, I'm getting some new information that the ultrasound tech missed, or that the ultrasound tech didn't give me yet. I must have missed it. Wait right here. She comes back about 30 seconds later and she says, I want to talk to you guys really quick. I missed something. The baby looks like he has markers for Down syndrome. At that moment, it was a huge blow to, I think, everybody in the room. That our OB looked shocked. I've never seen my husband look like that. I will never forget the look on his face. He looked devastated. He looked like his whole world had just been torn apart, because we knew this was our baby boy, and now our doctor is telling us that he could possibly have Down syndrome. This was a huge blow. And then she gave us a little bit of information on Down syndrome and offered us to terminate the pregnancy. And then she asked us, did we have any questions? And I'm just like, at this point, we don't really have any questions. We're trying to still process all the information that you're telling us. At this point, our OB offers us two methods or options to determine if the baby for sure has Down syndrome or not. She offers us the first one, which is amniocentesis test, and that's when they stick a really big needle into your belly and they draw fluid from the sac that the baby is in, and from that fluid they can determine from DNA or cells that 100% if the baby has Down syndrome or not. But the only problem is that carries a risk of miscarriage, which we're not willing to do at all. We just went through that scare, so that's not an option for us. Naturally, we went with option number 2, which was the genetic testing, and all they do is draw my blood and they determine if the baby has Down syndrome for my genetics or from my blood. But that takes 2 weeks, but we wanted to do that one. So this was the longest 2 weeks of my life. It was so stressful. It was very trying. It was very crazy. And even though my faith wavered a little bit, like, I still believed that he would be born a typical newborn baby. And I wasn't as educated on Down syndrome as I am now. I just thought it was some crazy death sentence, or I thought it was like some crazy disease or sickness that my baby wouldn't have a chance at life, that he couldn't have a good life. And I was so wrong. I didn't know that Down syndrome literally occurs when two people conceive, when a mom and dad come together, and from sperm and egg, when they meet and when they conceive, that baby inherits one more gene or one extra chromosome from either the mom or dad. This is literally their genetic makeup from conception. So this is how God is allowing them to be born. This isn't how I thought it would be, but at the time I just was not educated, so I'm just so distraught over these next 2 weeks waiting for the results. And we finally get the call from the genetic specialist over the phone. So she says, we have good news, and she tells us that it's a baby boy. I was not shocked. I was so happy, but I was not shocked because I knew this is what God had promised us. This is what we were prophesied, and this is what he had for us, a baby boy. And then she goes, the other news is he has a 50% chance of having Down syndrome. And she starts giving us all this information, and she tells us that we should prepare to tour the NICU, because a lot of times babies with Down syndrome have medical issues, so he may need to stay in the NICU as soon as he's born. They offered me to terminate again, and at this point the only thing that I could say to the woman on the phone was that I wish I would not be offered the option of termination again. It's making me very upset. This is my baby, regardless of if he's born with Down syndrome. I just began to remind myself that God promised us a healthy baby boy. And so from then, I'm just continuing to pray. I'm also continuing to pray that I'm hoping he won't be born with Down syndrome, or maybe he'll be a typical baby. I'm just hoping for the best. Now we have even more appointments, because when a baby has a risk of Down syndrome, the doctors now want to get you into more appointments to monitor the baby more closely, because like I said, a lot of times babies with Down syndrome can have a host of medical issues, and so they want to make sure the baby is healthy. So we're going to these appointments, and then we're hit with 2 more bombs around I was 5 months pregnant. We're hit with 2 more bombs. And at this appointment, they tell us that the baby has a hole in his heart, and at 2, they told me I had placenta previa. So this is when the placenta covers the exit that the baby should be going through during childbirth, and this can be dangerous and even deadly to both the mom and the baby. So we just got delivered these 2 huge blows on one appointment, and we're sent back home to deal with all this mess. And at this point, I am angry with God, very angry with God. I'm just like, God, why would you allow us to be pregnant, to almost miscarry? Why would you allow us to be going through this? The baby has a hole in his heart, and I have placenta previa, which means it may be another complicated birth. I don't want to experience that again. He may have Down syndrome, all these different things. And at this point, I totally just stopped even talking to God about it. I was so depressed. I began to feel like I was going to go through postpartum depression. We're halfway through the pregnancy, and I'm just getting all this heavy weight on me. So my OB suggested that I try the antidepressants this time, and I did, and they made a world of a difference. And I'm going to make another video on that. Like I said before, I'm just going to tell you guys my experience with that, but they made a world of a difference. It was a struggle this whole pregnancy to remain happy, knowing that all these things are floating through my head, all these things are up in the air. But as I took the antidepressants, I began to be a little bit better with my hormones and everything, and I began to just pray again. I began to have a little faith again, and I began to build up my relationship with God again, because it had really suffered. I began to build up my faith again, and I began praying for a healthy pregnancy again. I began speaking over my womb, and I began to just slowly but surely come back into the faith and come back into believing that this will be a healthy pregnancy, and just began trusting God again. So with everything going on, y'all, I began to have contractions. I actually started having Braxton Hicks around maybe 5 or 6 months, but then it started turning into like slowly but surely real contractions around 7 to 8 months. I guess it was all the stress from everything in the pregnancy, and now I have to go to weekly appointments because I could be going into early labor, and this is insane. So now I'm going to appointments every week, which I think is adding to the stress. But I knew in my heart, I really felt like my body was preparing for an early labor, because if you've been through labor or a birth before, you know your body. And it's so funny because my husband began nesting around March and I wasn't due till May, but I think we both kind of knew that I was going to give birth early. So here he is painting the walls, he's cleaning stuff down, he's making adjustments in the house, and it's only March. So I'm like, babe, you think I'm going to go into labor early? He's like, no, we just want to be prepared. But we were both nesting at this point. And I began bleeding again around maybe 32 weeks, 33 weeks. And it continued for a couple weeks on and off until around 36 weeks, I really began bleeding. And this can point towards early labor or mean that something is wrong. So we end up in the hospital. And my OB says, okay, if the bleeding stops, then you should be good to go home and everything should be fine. We're going to monitor you overnight, so let's hope the bleeding stops. The bleeding did not stop. At this point, with me bleeding like this can mean that something is wrong on the inside. So she's like, we may have to possibly do a C-section. I mean, even if you have a C-section now, the baby will go to NICU, but it should be fine and everything like that. So we're waiting to see if the bleeding stops. The bleeding did not stop. She comes in like, okay, we're going to get you prepped for surgery. You're going to go through for a C-section in 30 minutes. So y'all, I went into the hospital April 21st, a month before. I was due May 21st. I went from, oh, you may go home if the bleeding stops, to you're about to have a C-section. Literally in a matter of hours. I was freaked out. I was panicked. I was hyperventilating because my first birth didn't go as planned. It was a crazy, terrible C-section. If you watched my first video on the postpartum depression, then you know a little bit about how that went. So we ended up having a C-section that day. And I thank God that this C-section was nothing like my first. It went really smooth. But my OB, as she was doing the operation, she was like, wow, yeah, your placenta ruptured. I'm so glad you stayed. I'm so glad we decided to do the surgery now, because that could have been, you know, very bad for you or the baby. That could have been very dangerous. Everything, God was keeping me covered. And also, I forgot to tell you guys, before we did the surgery, they did an ultrasound and the hole in my son's heart had completely closed up. So I thank God for that as well. He wasn't born with any heart issues. Although he was born with the Down syndrome, and he did have to stay in the NICU because he was, one, a premature baby. He had breathing issues, so he was on oxygen, and he had eating issues, so he was also on a feeding tube. So I'm going to make a video on that too, because I feel like there's a lot of moms that may need that information. Maybe you're preparing for a stay in the NICU, or maybe there's a possibility that your baby could be staying in the NICU. I'm going to make a video on that, everything that you should need and what to expect. But I also thank God our son came out a lot quicker than a lot of the babies in the NICU that he did have to stay with. He came out, he only stayed in there for about a month. It was a lot to adjust to, just going back and forth to the hospital because we weren't able to take him home for about a month. Pumping my milk because I couldn't breastfeed him. He was on tubes. He couldn't even eat. And just adjusting to now having 2 children and the Down syndrome diagnosis, it was a lot to adjust to. But eventually I did adjust. And I thank God that he was born with the Down syndrome. He's such a light. He's such a joy. He's the light of our house. And I know it may seem like a cliche thing that every parent says, but no, he's literally a joy. And I want to just encourage any new moms that may have just recently gotten a Down syndrome diagnosis that it's going to be okay, that your child is going to have an excellent life, that Down syndrome does not determine who they're going to be and what they're going to do. My son proves me wrong every single day since his birth, that he's achieving milestones. He's doing things that I didn't even think were possible for people with Down syndrome, and that your baby does have a future, and they're just going to blow your mind. They're just an amazing, unique, fearfully and wonderfully made individual by God. And I also want to say, make sure you are prepared. This is one thing I really regret, is not being prepared for my child stay in the NICU and not knowing enough about Down syndrome. I really wish I would have prepared, so that's very important. And these books I want to share with you guys. These two books really helped me after finding out about my son's Down syndrome diagnosis. This one is Babies with Down syndrome, and this tells you everything you need to know about having a baby with Down syndrome. Every question you can have, from medical issues to feeding to the different doctors that your child should see, the appointments that they should make, cognitive and motor skills, all these learnings, everything that you literally need to know. This was a huge help. This was my guide to my baby in his first year and beyond of life. So this book as well, Gifts 2, and I think there's an original Gifts, but this book, Gifts 2, is the one that I got, and it's basically a book comprised of stories and essays and experiences from people like family, friends, teachers, coaches, medical professionals who have stories or experiences with people they know with Down syndrome, and they tell about how they enrich their lives. So this book is really inspiring, and it really helped me change my perspective about my son and have a brighter outlook on his life with Down syndrome, and that he can be what he wants to be, and that they have a wonderful life. This book, if you just received a Down syndrome diagnosis, or maybe you know someone, these two books are definitely a huge help. A huge help is something that you want to have. You can probably find these on Amazon. I'm going to link these below if you want to check them out. They were lifesavers to me. So I hope this video helped someone. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Make sure you share it. And I will be seeing you guys next week. Thanks for watching. I love you guys. Bye.